Hello and welcome to AEF TV in association with Engerati. I'm joined now by Ambassador Henry Macauley, who is the Minister of Energy for Sierra Leone. And firstly, thank you for joining us. Thanks for making the time. And it's probably been a busy 2.5 days, so I hope you're enjoying sitting down and taking the load off your feet a little bit. One of my first questions is obviously around Sierra Leone, and can you paint a picture for us of what the energy mix and energy strategy looks like for Sierra Leone, and then we can deep dive a little bit and go on to some other subjects later on in the interview.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam, and thank you also to the organizers for having organized this wonderful event and for having me. Very exciting about the possibilities. Well, Sierra Leone, as you know, is a small country, 6.5 million people. They're about on the west coast of Africa, blessed with a lot of sunshine, blessed with wonderful beaches. Not much has been said about that.
I'm going to come and visit.
You need to. We unfortunately have not had much success with power. Currently, we only have about 100 megawatts of electricity installed capacity, and we have a need to ramp that up to about 1,000 megawatts. And the reason being
that's a huge gap.
It's a very huge gap. The reason being that there's quite a lot of potential mining activity, some ongoing, because we do have 1.3 trillion tons of iron ore. And we have huge reserves of bauxite and of gold and of titanium as well, not to mention the diamonds as well. So there's a big appetite for power, and the demand forecast has indicated that we'll need that much power in a couple of years.
So that power demand is being driven by industry and obviously as well as citizens. Is that correct?
That power demand is being driven by domestic demand,
right,
which goes up to maybe 200-300 megawatts, and the rest by the mining and industrial demand, which we've seen. Currently, most of our power comes from our hydro, 50 megawatts, which is a renewable source by itself, but it's seasonal. So right now we're in the dry season. We only get about 10% of that, and then obviously you have to supplement, fill in the gap with your thermal plants, and they've not been in very good shape. So taking advantage of current innovations and current improvements in renewable energy technology, for example in solar, where we have seen the price of PVs drop by about 70%, we're embarking on an ambitious renewable energy program, which will seek to give a more balanced energy mix of thermals and renewable energy.
So the renewable side is a combination of solar, hydro, wind as well, or?
Well, we haven't done a wind mapping yet,
right?
But we intend to embark on that very soon. But yes, we do have 5,000 megawatts of solar hydro potential. And in terms of solar, we have up to 5 kilowatts hour per square meter per day. So that's really a good enough asset which you should exploit. But of course, we still have a need for base load, because renewable energy is good, but it puts a lot of pressure on your grid flexibility. So we do have a need for base load, and I'm happy that one of the discussions here was around the coal debates. Because you need to have reliable baseload that is affordable and predictable. So there is a need for baseload, which we're also going to pursue to combine with renewable energy efforts.
And your baseload, the fuel source, coal you're looking at, or which route?
Well, you know, these days you have to cover your mouth when you mention coal. but I really think that research and development has been wonderful recently, and I think the demand for power and the competitiveness has been driving that research and development, to the extent that today we see a lot of innovation in coal, in clean coal. I hear that there are possibilities of having emission levels of down to 1.5 1.5 times that of gas, as opposed to 10 times that of gas in the past. So it is an exciting possibility. We don't have gas as a natural resource, and you know the cost of transporting gas, LNG, regasification,
yes,
it
pretty
can
high.
be quite huge, yeah.
And so in terms of then the investment opportunities, because again, and the framework, if you can paint that picture for us, you know, I am assuming, but you can correct me, you're trying to look at the sort of independent power provider route potentially, and what is the, you know, what are some of the investment opportunities that you can see on the horizon in Sierra Leone?
Well, I think first of all, it's worthwhile to state clearly here that Sierra Leone is a country with a very high political stability level. We had a civil war about almost 15 years ago, and we bounced back so quickly that we were being studied as a model for post-conflict development. We also have done quite well in all the indices, talking about anti-corruption, talking about reforms, talking about talking about Millennium Development Goals, readiness to do business, and so on. So Human Development Index. We've done very well. And in fact, a few years ago, we had the highest GDP growth in Africa. We were by 11.5% and built to move up to 22%, 23%. That was before we had we were hit by Ebola, the regional disease, which thankfully has gone away. So there's quite a solid foundation for businesses to come in and thrive. My president used to be a former businessman, so he's trying to drive the country's economy through private sector investment and private sector participation. We also have created a public-private partnership unit that's supposed to act as a bridge between the public sector, government, and the private sector to make sure that we find common ground very quickly. So that is a foundation. And in terms of some specific projects, I think there are three areas where work needs to be done. There's a generation area, of course, ramping up electricity, but as you well know, you need to have the transmission to carry, convey, and evacuate that electricity that you're going to be generating. So we have a need to also ramp up our transmission, which today starts at about 75 megawatts. We need to ramp it up to about 750 megawatts so that we have enough capacity list to convey the power. So there are opportunities in transmission, in generation, and I dare say in capacity building as well, where it is important to make sure that the institutions are capable to handle development.
I'm glad you brought up the transmission piece, because I always find it somewhat ironic that it's not a greater part of the conversation. Certainly, you know, with people I interview, you know, because you got to get this power somewhere to people, to industry, and so on. So, can I ask you a question? So how are you sort of pursuing and building the framework for investment into the transmission and distribution infrastructure? Are you coupling that with the power generation? So are you saying that, look, if you're going to build this power plant, you also need to contribute to the strengthening of the grid or increasing reliability? Because it seems to be one of those questions where people haven't quite got the answer about how you drive investment into that.
Well, you know, traditionally governments always owned transmission, as it were, and distribution. And for Sierra Leone, we've just concluded the unbundling process, which was concluded last year, December 31st, which is supposed to open the way into private sector investment and private sector participation. So it's still a pretty new phenomenon for us. But I believe that in Sierra Leone now, our backbone is a 161 kV line, transmission line, that comes from our hydro at Bombona down to Freetown. And so any project that needs to be delivered would have to find a way to be connected to that backbone. So what we do, we have an integrated approach now, where if you're building a power plant, you have to make sure that you convey it to the backbone. But I think in terms of business models or financial models, I think we can safely look at, apart from having governments make investment or having DFIs come in, and some of them have expressed quite an appetite, but I think we should also look strictly from private sector. We can look at transmission service agreements, where maybe a portion of your tariff can be allocated towards paying back for the transmission investment over a concession period.
And you know, it's amazing how quickly these things go. So I've just been given the signal that we're coming to the end of our time here. But one of the other questions I was going to ask you is, you know, how do you see the role of government? I'm not going to ask you to comment on what other people are doing, but you know, the role of government in the mix, because a lot of people who have been sat here say, well, okay, you know, we had a gentleman earlier who was saying, like, yeah, we've got all the projects and we've got everything lined up, but it's taking us up to 3 years to get it over the ground because we aren't getting the right infrastructure or whatever. So how do you see the role of government acting in that whole mix?
Well, fortunately for me, I was in the private sector before moving to government. So I guess it's been pretty easy for me to understand where the gaps are from where I'm standing now or I'm sitting now. I believe that government's role is, first of all, to create the enabling environment. Now, it's becoming like a catchphrase, enabling environment, but there's a lot of work, solid actual work that needs to be done in order for you to create that environment. Political stability is very, very critical, and it needs to be in such a way that it's open and transparent. And then, of course, I think we need to have government having the political will to enact policies that will support the private sector. And for us, one of the tools we've set up, we've created, has been the public-private partnership unit. But I think also, in tandem with government's efforts, we also need to make sure that we have real and genuine partners. Because you see, there's a whole mix of an effort that needs to work together in unison so that we all achieve our targets and our objectives. Today you see that energy is linked to climate change. Energy is linked to bad emissions, greenhouse gases, environmental hazards, etc., etc. So as a world, we all need to make sure that there is well-balanced energy for everyone. I was telling them at an earlier session that if we don't have electricity, and if our people are suffering, that's how you will start exporting refugees. So you need to make sure that people do have access to electricity. And you mentioned earlier the off-grid aspects, off-grid solutions. Yes, in as much as you want the grid, on-grid solutions with power going through electricity lines, but you also want to look at renewable and off-grid solutions which can quickly provide electricity solutions for local communities. We have a rural community and we only have about 10% access of electricity in the rural community. So that's a huge opportunity there for investors and for businesses.
And in that area, there's also a huge opportunity for innovation, right? Yeah, we're seeing some really great projects, you know, where in fact even the local community is kind of funding the projects as well. And I saw one where, you know, the electricity is being paid for over mobile phones and stuff like that. You know, it's quite innovative what you can do.
Precisely. And to anchor on that, in October or November of this year, thereabouts, we're still trying to work out the final date, we're going to launch our National Renewable Energy Program in Sierra Leone. And this is meant to be an event that will have like a week-long exhibition where we hope to attract companies involved in renewable energy solutions and technology to come and display those products, because we want to bring them closer to the people who need the power, but who maybe, as of now, they're harboring fears about the affordability of renewable energy and the ability of renewable energy to offer quick solutions. So we plan to have that exhibition and that fair, and we plan to use also to launch some of the ambitious projects that we have surrounding off-grid solutions and rural electrification.
And that exhibition is targeted, what you're looking for are companies who can help rural communities. That's the primary aim of it.
Absolutely.
Right.
It is rural, it is renewable energy solutions for rural electrification, for rural communities. And of course, we'll also study different financial models of using mobile phone payments, of using community-based payments, community-based ownership which is very, very important because it guarantees the security and longevity of the projects, in having the communities own it and having the communities themselves being trained to maintain this program. So that's something we're looking at. We're planning very hard, and I'm sure we'll come out with a major announcement about that soon.
Perfect. Well, do share that with us, and you know, we hope that we can give that a little bit more airtime. So one of my final questions as well is, you know, you've obviously been at this event for 2.5 days now, clearly. What have been your sort of highlights? You know, either conversations you've had, or talks you've seen, or maybe debates even you've had.
Well, you know, my first government job was as an ambassador to many countries, and there we're used to long conversations and long meetings, long discussions. But as a Minister of Energy, which is supposed to be engineering and technology driven, I always approach some of these conferences with skepticism. But I'm happy to say that this time around, I've been very pleasantly surprised, very invigorated by the conversations that have taken place. I believe they've been frank and open, and I believe a lot of the hitherto taboo issues, they have been put out here, and people have given frank and open opinions. Things like the coal debate, I think it's come out clearly. Things like transmission and distribution. Why are we not talking about transmission and distribution? Why don't we have private sector involvement more in distribution? I think that has come out clearly this time around. And I think also the message that has come around is that we need speed. We need speed. People are dying out there for lack of access to electricity. Kids are going blind. Pregnant women are dying in the hospital because there's no electricity in the hospitals. We need speed. And I think we cannot say we do not have all the resources available at our behest to make these things happen. We just have to be serious about it and come together and make it happen.
I think that is a great place to leave it on. So the message is speed. Let's hurry up and do this. I think. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you as well for watching. It's been another interview at AFTV in association with Engerati. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.